The way out is the way in. I don't know why it often takes a crisis or a fastball from the universe knocking us off our feet for us to finally have our ass on fire enough to act. Maybe it's a flaw in the human condition, or maybe it's simply part of the human condition. In any case, the gift of desperation compels us to move forward. Without fire in our lives, we sometimes don't have the internal combustion necessary to change and take risks. We get too comfortable being comfortable, even if we're mired in the comfort of mediocrity or worse. We just don't move our ass. I'll get more into motivation later on. During this time in my life, I slowly came to understand how having your ass on fire, or what I call AOF, not only moves us human beings into action, but compels us to seek our truths and act with conviction in life. This pertains as much to mindful athletes as it does to anyone else. I know this for a fact because I've lived it, and I've had the good fortune to help many other people live it over the years, both on and off the courts. During the first AA meeting, and despite my initial resistance, it was impossible to ignore the wisdom in those 12 steps. Step 1 was easy in any case. 1, admitting that I was powerless over alcohol and drugs, and that my life had become unmanageable as a result. Steps 2, 3, and 4 sounded pretty reasonable too. 2, believing that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity, which I knew did not take me off the hook. 3, making a decision to turn my life over to the care of God as I understood him, or her, or it, meaning that I did not have to ascribe to any organized religion or to a traditional God, and that I was free to believe in anything I wanted. The point was to believe. 4, making a searching and fearless moral inventory of myself, a pretty big job, since I had quite a backlog of emotional inventory in my personal warehouse. You have to begin somewhere. As Pema Chodron puts it in her book, The Places That Scare You, quote, "Right here is a good place to start. Start where you are." This is true in life and in sports. There might not ever be a right time to start. In fact, often what prevents people from moving forward is the daunting sense that they'll never get where they intend to go, so why bother even starting? But, as many of us know, taking small steps consistently in the right direction will eventually yield big results. This is one of the most simple and profound truths in life. You have to start taking baby steps, even though you know you'll fall down. If you don't begin the process, and you don't fall down a lot, you'll never walk. So, I got out of my own macho way, let my guard down completely, and began my own process. I reached out for help and began to build a community of support around me, a therapist, various support groups, a free inpatient detox program where I could be anonymous. I knew that it would be much harder to recover if I was unemployed, so I did whatever it took to keep my job and my sanity intact. But without the veil of drink and drug masking my pain, it all came rushing back. The intense chronic lower back pain, the migraines, the craving for short relief that I'd appeased with substance abuse for years. There were days when it was so intensely difficult to stay sober that I had to step into the men's room at work, close the stall door, get on my knees, and recite the serenity prayer to myself. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Even though I recited this prayer often, I never thought I'd really see the day when it would feel real to me and be more than just words I said to get through the hard stuff. But somehow, things started to shift. One day, a psychotherapist referred me to a stress management program offered by my company's health management organization. This was back when stress management was the term for mindfulness. The program introduced me to techniques for managing chronic pain that included meditation and yoga. It was a slow but powerful revelation. I learned to listen to my body. When my backaches occurred, I understood that it was a sign that I was under too much stress and needed to investigate my pain. I began to look for its cause, treat it gently, and adapt my behaviors to take out of it rather than hide it. In essence, I began to figure it out. When I felt a migraine coming on, I would lie down and do some deep breathing, visualizing the oxygen moving through the regions where the tightness was, creating space in my head, and allowing that tightness to flow out in my out-breath. I learned how to be in the moment, slow things down, practice bare awareness, and listen to my body. Invariably, my body told me what it needed. Sitting still. I had the good fortune of being in the right place at the right time and learning from some of the finest mavericks in the field. Joan Boroshenko, Larry Rosenberg, John Kabat-Zinn, and Sharon Salzberg. Even so, the first time I tried to meditate, it would have been much easier to bench press 50-pound weights than sit still. I went to my first sitting meditation retreat back in the day when it was not common for African Americans to meditate with predominantly white people in a small New England town. When I was told to buy a cushion for meditation, I went out and bought an actual sofa cushion. That's how clueless I was. Just sitting for any length of time was painful. I had no flexibility in my body and could not get comfortable no matter how hard I tried. I didn't realize at the time that I was actually trying too hard, but more on that as well later. My knees and ankles hurt. My back ached. I kept moving around from the cushion to a chair and back again, no doubt distracting the meditators around me. My body just didn't want to sit still. And then there was my mind, flitting around and wandering, fixating on sensations, anxieties, and cravings that came up. But the practice of mindfulness, as I'll address in these pages, slowly taught me how to work through this. I began learning insight meditation and started a daily mindfulness practice after completing a 21-day detox program in 1984. I committed to a regular practice, and a few years later, I discovered the Cambridge Insight Meditation Center, where I continued to practice. By then, I'd been clean for several years, but I still had a double life going, a double life of an entirely different nature now. My deep commitment to meditation and mindfulness was in stark contrast to my daily life as a financial analyst. The former filled me with a sense of purpose and joy, while the latter was a dead, soul-crushing experience. I wanted to cut this cord and be truly free, but how? I had no alternative job, no backup plan, and little security. Still, I decided to focus more on what I wanted versus how I was going to get there. By coincidence, right around this time in 1988, the mythologist and philosopher Joseph Campbell appeared in a 6-part television documentary series called The Power of Myth. The series was based on interviews between Campbell and journalist Bill Moyer. The interviews were also published as a book with the same title. Filmed at George Lucas's Skywalker Ranch, the documentary was an exploration of Campbell's sweeping work, chronicling how myths have shaped our culture and consciousness throughout the ages. At one point during this widely watched documentary, Moyers asked Campbell if Campbell ever felt in what seemed from the outside to be a charmed life, as if he was helped in his journey of self-discovery by hidden hands. Campbell replied, "All the time. It is miraculous. I even have a superstition that has grown on me as a result of invisible hands coming all the time. Namely, that if you do follow your bliss, you put yourself on a kind of track that has been there all the while, waiting for you, and the life that you ought to be living is the one you are living. When you can see that, you begin to meet people who are in your field of bliss, and they open doors to you. I say follow your bliss, and don't be afraid, and doors will open where you didn't know they were going to be." Joseph Campbell probably had no idea that those 3 words, follow your bliss, would so deeply resonate with viewers that they'd become an enduring cultural trope that still inspires people today to take leaps of faith. In fact, at that time in my life, I was already affirming the words of Joseph Campbell. I'd already shifted my focus to my field of bliss and started meeting people who opened doors for me. And then one day, instead of going to work, I took a mental health day and went to my weekly interview with Larry Rosenberg, who was my meditation teacher at the time. Larry took one look at me and said, "What's going on with you today? You don't look pretty happy." He didn't miss a beat when I told him that I'd simply decided not to go to work. "You should make a habit of that," he replied. So I did. Shortly thereafter, I gave notice to my boss, packed up my things, and told my coworkers about my decision to leave. Nearly every one of them, all pretty miserable at the job, said to me in earnest, "I wish I could do that." Of course, they could have done that. They could have shifted their focus to their own fields of bliss. Maybe their asses weren't on fire enough, or maybe they just didn't believe there was a way out. The author Annie Lamott once wrote about a sermon in which the pastor said that if you put bees in a glass jar, they wouldn't fly out. Lamott wrote, quote, "They'll wander around on the glass floor, imprisoned by the glass surrounding them, when all they'll have to do is look up, and they could fly away." No one had specifically told me that all I had to do was look up, but in essence, that's what I did. I finally opened my funky mind in the right way, and I realized that I could fly. I took off and never looked back. Full circle. I'm not sure that I would have been able to make that leap of faith without having committed by then to a spiritual practice. In 1986, I went back to school and received a Master's of Education in Counseling Psychology from Cambridge College in Cambridge, Massachusetts. For 2 years after that, I didn't work, and I lived off what little savings I'd accrued. I committed myself to reading almost every book I could find on the subject of mindfulness, metaphysics, psychology, and philosophy. I was basically trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up, while attending regular silent retreats, sittings, talks, and teachings at the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts, and at the Cambridge Insight Meditation Center. With time, I became a practice leader, responding to requests at the Center for Meditation Instruction, and by 1989 I was living at CIMC as a resident, and I stayed on there for many years, participating in teacher training and doing my first mindfulness-based stress reduction and relaxation internship with Jon Kabat-Zinn. That parlayed into more work and study at the Stress Reduction and Relaxation Program at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center, where I became a program director and then a member of the board of directors at IMS, CIMC, and the Spirit Rock Meditation Center and Insight Meditation Practice Center in Woodacre, California. It was during this period, around 1991, that Jon Kabat-Zinn and I worked together to open up an inner-city satellite clinic in Worcester, Massachusetts. I later became a full-time staff member and the director of the Prison Project with Jon. Over the course of 5 years and in 5 different locations, we taught mindfulness to over 5,000 inmates, as well as to a host of departments of corrections administrators and officials. For me, this was coming full circle. Many of these inmates came from the inner city pressure cooker I knew so well. These guys were weaned on tension and anxiety. Through the practice of mindfulness, I helped them understand the operation of their minds and emotions, teaching them how to calmly detach from outside provocations and habitual patterns of reaction. Of course, I'm not suggesting that people can just meditate their way out of injustice or out of the bad karma they've created, but we can cultivate control of ourselves and choose with a clear mind how to respond appropriately and effectively in our lives with calmness and wisdom. It was during this time working in the prison system that I was approached by Phil Jackson, and I was brought on board to teach mindfulness to the Chicago Bulls and to the other athletes. Now, Joseph Campbell's words really rang true, and having the courage to follow my bliss, not knowing how I was going to make it, but believing deeply in what I wanted to achieve, I put myself on a kind of track that has indeed been there all the while, waiting for me. I stepped back into my original field of bliss, the arena of sports, only this time I came back to it with the consciousness of a mindful athlete and the knowledge that, as Michael Jordan suggested, quote, that Zen Buddhist stuff really works. I also came to realize that you couldn't solve problems with the same consciousness that had created them. It's only in changing your consciousness that you can solve problems and transform your game, whatever it is, and wherever you're playing it. In many ways, my path is a reflection of the Buddha's Four Noble Truths, which I'll talk about more later. For now, suffice it to say that life brings suffering no matter who we are, but there is a path for us out of that leads out of suffering and onto the joyful journey of self-discovery, no matter how painful our personal history might have been. The 5 superpowers. The 5 superpowers are mindfulness, concentration, insight, right effort, and trust. These spiritual superpowers are interconnected and they work together. Buddhism sometimes calls the first 3 powers mindfulness, concentration, and insight, the threefold training. Our unconscious mind contains the seeds of all of these energies. You can cultivate these 3 energies throughout the day in whatever activity you're engaged. Mindfulness, concentration, and insight contain each other. If you're very mindful, you can have concentration and insight in your mindfulness. Generating these energies is the heart of meditation practice. They help you live every moment of life deeply. They bring you joy and happiness and help you handle your own suffering and the suffering in the people around you. The 4th power, right effort or diligence, is the energy that makes us steadfast in our practice. Cognitive function improves when we have a positive state of mind. Bringing diligence to our practice of mindfulness is a great way to cultivate positive mind states. But when we practice sitting or walking meditation in a way that causes our body or mind to suffer, that isn't right effort, because our effort isn't based on our understanding. The last of the 5 powers is trust. It can also be seen as faith or confidence, but the way I look at it is as courage. Having the courage to delve into the unknown and trust what is found that there makes the practice of mindfulness and the other powers possible. As my friend Sharon Salzberg puts it in her book Loving Kindness, quote, completeness and unity constitute our most fundamental nature as living beings. That is true for all of us, no matter how wonderful or terrible our lives have been, no matter how many traumas or scars we may carry from the past, no matter what we have gone through or what we are suffering now, our intrinsic wholeness is always present and we can recognize it. Being a mindful athlete involves living this truth for yourself, because there is no separating who you are on the court, field, or yoga mat from who you are in the world at large. That intrinsic wholeness serves you wherever you are and in whatever you're doing. Everything is connected.